Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday, and welcome to Something to Talk About Live. My name is Jamie Hinkle. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the Learning and Inclusion Manager at PFLAG National. Just like every week, I am going to really quickly and immediately introduce Jean Marie Navetta, who is my partner in crime here at PFLAG, and she is going to lead our conversation today.
Hello, Jamie.
Hello.
We were just talking about this the other day. We have now been working together in the same place for almost 10 years. We're more than partners in crime. It's like almost like a life partner in crime at this point.
Yeah. I mean, I have been making jokes. I've been on your team for 10 years, and it's our 10th anniversary. You're going to
What are we buying for each other?
Really
figure it out.
In cup for against the bars of our jail cells one day.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
We will see you later, Jamie. Thank you.
Absolutely. Bye.
Hey, everybody. My name is Jean Marie Navetta. My pronouns are she and her, or if you speak Spanish, ella. And I'm the Director of Learning and Inclusion at PFLAG National. Every Thursday, we get together to have a conversation about something that is happening in the LGBTQ space, and we bring some friends along with us. And today, we are going to talk about social media while you are probably watching us on a social media channel. So if you go to straightforequality.org/discussion series, and by the way, see our pretty new website, you'll be able to download this week's article. And this week's article came from USA Today. It's by Terry Collins, and the title was, "The Bar is Low for the Social Media Industry. Top Platforms Are Unsafe for the LGBTQ Community," new report says. And so some of the highlights, if you can call it that, were that about 64% of people who are LGBTQ said that they had experienced online harassment in the last year. That's versus about 41% of the general population. But I'm still going to point out that 41% of people experiencing harassment is a disturbing number too. About 75% of people said that happened to them on Facebook, which tends to be the most used one for a lot of people. 51% of respondents said that they had been targeted for really extreme examples of abuse, things like doxing. And the GLAAD report actually said that about 80% of social media companies actually don't do a very good job of moderating and creating safer spaces for people. So we are going to have a conversation about what is going on. And to do that, I am going to bring two of my colleagues in. First, Jamel Dooley, our chapter services coordinator. Hello, Jamel. And
hi, I'm back. It's my fave.
And our newest team member at PFLAG. So everybody please meet Greg Rakiski, who is our social media and digital content manager. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you so much for having me, Jean Marie.
So excited. And you got here just at the perfect time to actually have this very crazy conversation. So I want to get to work because I think there are so many things to talk about here. So Greg, let's actually let you take the first swing at the first question, and then we'll go to Jamel. Did anything in the report surprise you? And specifically, why or why not?
Yeah, that's, I think, a great question. And to be short, no, I don't think I was too surprised. I think being in the social media space professionally, having worked with many organizations and brands, I've been firsthand at seeing a lot of this and being a part of the LGBTQ plus community. And I think what I was surprised with, maybe one of the few things, was just how detailed, and they definitely brought the receipts. So there was no shortage. If you go through this report, if you actually look through it, the amount of links to data and resources, and just the what constitutes hate speech, and some of the things I wasn't even aware of that we were talking to right before this. And so unfortunately, I have to say that I really wasn't too surprised.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about a couple of those things. It was kind of an interesting conversation for people who spent a lot of time in this space still to look at some of those examples and say that's really insidious, and it's something I haven't encountered yet, but clearly enough people did for it to warrant making a report. Jamel, we're waiting to hear from you. Waiting.
No, I was not surprised by any of the information that was contained in the article today. It really lined up with my personal experience with using social media for personal use, but also like starting a brand and having to interact with folks that way. None of this surprised me at all. I think the article does a very good job of illuminating several things that we'll get into today, and I'm really happy that they brought receipts.
Actually just want to ask the two of you, because the two of you have pretty extensive and vibrant and deeper digital lives when it comes to social media. Just sort of looking at it from where you are right now, and you look at what this information was, do you feel like it acknowledges some of the progress that has been made, or was it kind of bad news for you that it's much worse than you thought it was?
That's tough for me to answer, Jean Marie. So there's a line in the article, and I think it's towards the end, and it's to the effect of the bar for social media companies are really low. So like what? Yes, just yesterday, Instagram added a feature to where you can add pronouns, and it was like, yeah, like that's super cool, but like it's 2021. Like, why are we just now doing this? So like, yay for change and growth, but also like the bar is set so low that like when they do things to kind of meet to where the rest of the world is, we clap.
Yeah, exactly. Greg, what about your observations? Getting better, getting worse, or did this validate where you thought things were?
I think it focuses on a lot of what the roadmap looks like ahead for all of the channels. And so I'll speak more globally, like, is there a problem? Is there hate speech and just vitriol and just such negative experiences sometimes on these platforms? Yes. Are we where we need to be today? Absolutely not. But have we made progress? I think we have made some, right? When Facebook was launched and when Twitter was launched, Facebook specifically with profiles, it was very focused on the binary. And so they are listening, and it is hard as a social media practitioner knowing how quickly the social media landscape changes, the growing populations, and to put that crisis communications hat on to foresee every potential problem is hard. And so I'm hopeful, and I think this roadmap from GLAAD might be a something that we threw in the platform's laps as areas to focus on for the LGBTQ plus population, yes, but marginalized communities overall. So I think I am going to put on my hopeful hat.
I like the hopeful hat. It's a good look for you. It's definitely a good look, because some of this stuff was scary, and I think hearing that gives me hope. So Lucy Bernholtz, who is the director of the Digital Civil Society Lab at Stanford, this is a great quote. She's quoting the article saying that social media platforms basically made themselves the equivalent of our roads, sewers, and utilities, essentially saying that they are an almost unavoidable, necessary part of our everyday. And I was actually telling the group here that during the last year, I got really sort of burnt out and exhausted and anxious from social media. And I just am on Facebook and decided I wasn't going to go on. And after about 3 weeks of not really being on, I realized that huge parts of my life and the life of people around me went by, and I didn't know about it, that I had actually become Facebook dependent just to get basic information about what's happening in other people's lives. So when I read that quote, it hit me hard, because I thought, wow, it's not like I can take the off ramp on this. I can, but I'm going to lose contact with so many people that I otherwise can't. And even for organizing and learning, it is an unavoidable tool in many cases. So Jamel, let me start with you. Do you agree, first of all, with that assessment? And how does this sort of line up when we know that 64% of LGBTQ users are saying they're experiencing harassment when they are using these necessary services?
Oh yeah, like agree 100%. Like just think of the ways that like like you said, we're on a platform right now doing this broadcast. Many of our PFLAG chapters have Facebook groups which they use to connect with their community and to find members and to fundraise. Think about like the viralness or the virality of like social media, how many people's careers have started. Essentially, the internet is another form of media. We've seen how it's played a role in government. Like there's so many places that we can pinpoint this. So I have to agree. While I don't think technology itself is the problem, you still have humans that are programming and or building these technologies, which is how we find ourselves in these particular positions, especially considering the fact that most tech companies are run by and supported by heterosexual, cisgender, old white guys with money, some of whom have trickled down to maybe you now have some younger folks that have that money, but the stats are still there. So you have to consider how, that mindset will shape the way that they build this technology and thus how we interact with it.
And I think that's an interesting point, because if you look at the GLAAD report in its recommendations, one of the recommendations across the board was that these social media organizations need to hire more diverse staff, because when you have a more diverse staff representing different issues, concerns, identities, you make more inclusive decisions on this. So it's not sort of this free for all or homogenous decision-making body. Greg, talk to us about that, about this idea of it being basically a utility, I mean, in many respects. And what does this mean for people who are LGBTQ?
Absolutely. Well, and I think it's so important. They talk about not only having LGBTQ policy and staff representation on staff, but having those people in the room when new products under a channel's umbrella are developed too. And I think that's so important. But yes, I mean, I think especially over the past year, just given our reliance on technology as a whole because of COVID-19, we are at the point where we're kind of burnt out. Probably we miss those human interactions. And so everything is a little bit heightened too. I'm hopeful that on the other side of this new normal, I have seen Twitter and their Twitter Spaces when they released that to the beta community. So that's their audio only platform. They were really listening, and they released captions for accessibility. They wanted to make sure that if you were hosting a space and anyone hopped in, you could report them and get them out of your space so it continues to be a safe environment. So I think, and again, that hopeful hat, I hope they continue to listen to their audiences and all of their communities that use their audiences and make those global changes because of the ubiquitousness of our users and just how we have, it's a way of language now. But I also think I have met so many people virtually that I've actually never met in person as a result of social media and the internet. And so as part of my LGBTQ plus journey coming out, friends who I met at college when I had to go back home, all of those situations, social media has been there in a way. I think part of this is talking about mental health and our own, like having an understanding of ourselves and when it's time to step away from the screen, to take some time to recharge for ourselves. But yeah, we take our phones everywhere. We have iPads, we have our computers. I like to just step outside and look at the sun every now and then and remember what it looks like.
What does it look like? I forgot. It's like a yellow-ish
something, a ball,
up high, and it's hot. We don't even remember. You know, I think that's sort of an interesting point, because as you said it, I'm thinking about people I know on Facebook and how many of them are people who maybe I met once or I met through somebody else digitally. And we've actually kind of gotten to know each other. Sometimes it's in a work context, sometimes, you know, in sort of queer organizing spaces. And it's as many doors as it opens. And you think, wow, we would have never met in the same room. It also, I think, poses as many challenges. Jamel, has that been your experience, this idea of it can be this connecting tool, especially for people who are queer?
Oh, absolutely. Like, even just thinking about little Jamel, like the internet just opened up so many doors, like not only for my own like personal learning, but like finding these communities to where I could like connect with people. One thing that I will say, like going back to the analogy about the, like, you know, the utilities, is that brings up something that's troubling for me. If I have an issue with my like electricity, I know who I need to call. If there's an issue with the water, I know who I need to call. Like, they're regulated. Like, there are bureaus and agencies to make sure that, you know, the water is good. When it comes to these sort of like technology companies, there really isn't any oversight. So like, you have like the Federal Trade Commission and all the comms people, but like, it kind of seems like they're still trying to update and trying to catch up and develop ways to regulate and make sure that social media is okay. And that concerns me, because we haven't quite gotten there yet, which I think may contribute to many of the things cited in this article.
I agree with you. It's funny because yesterday, I think it was yesterday morning, I was watching the news as I was getting ready, and they were talking about that a whole bunch of anti-vaxxer things had been taken down on Instagram. And the question was, how did these even get in, given all of the protections that had already been put into place? And I think, Jamel, it really speaks to what you're saying, which is it's not as cut and dried as it is if you're having a problem with your power, for example, or a standard utility. But actually that beautifully and perfectly gets us into the last question, which is where we want to spend some time, because there were some really fascinating recommendations. So the GLAAD report did have a lot of recommendations, and I actually made a couple of notes on some of them. They were things like elevating legitimate voices, improving those community guidelines, accountability and transparency in how decisions are made, Easier reporting, your point, Jamel, about if something goes off the rails, what do I do? Make consequences count. Creating friction, which is why I definitely want to talk about that and what that means, because I was fascinated. So Greg, can we start with you talking about, so there were a lot of recommendations here that were very sort of big picture. So for the social media companies, which ones do you think are the most important ones to start looking at, and which ones should we be advocating for?
Yeah, I think the opportunity for moderating and the AI reporting and improving that process is so huge, because if you think of computer language, it's binary. If you think of the people who are submitting the reports, they run gambits of communities, intersectional voices and everything. And so I think how that process is escalated then to a human, but also I recognize the challenge, the billions of people that are using social media channels who are reporting, and you have to be able to set it up to do that. So to Jamel's point, like, there is a huge hurdle to get over because of the nature of social media and how fast everything is changing. I think the friction idea is very interesting to me as someone in the space. I always caution people when they tell me with brands that they want to go viral, and you have to be careful what that comes with. And so virality can be a very sticky situation for brands, because oftentimes what goes viral is not what you actually wanted to go viral. And I think we see that in fake news and what's circulated in all of these groups and becomes accepted as fact or true or based in data. And that's just not the case. I think, again, there has been, I love the birdwatch opportunity with Twitter. I think Facebook is starting to get in this space, but then it teeters on the freedom of speech, right? Like, how far is too far as the platforms? And so again, it's so nuanced, because how far do we want the platforms to go? If you remember when Facebook was testifying in front of Congress, the questions they asked and what Mark Zuckerberg was talking about, very much a disconnect in terms of literacy and understanding of these platforms. So I worry about regulations. Are we going to regulate the right thing? Or how do we educate people around social media in general? So I think that these are a great starting point to have this conversation, to look at some sort of roadmap like this. What this looks like in a year, I think, will be very interesting, because if you look through the report, GLAAD said that they were going to attribute grades, but everyone would have failed. And so this is a great opportunity for these platforms to look at this and hopefully come out with not an F next year, right?
I thought that was like one of the most fascinating things about the report. We're not giving anybody grades, because our baseline would be F pretty much across the board. Really quickly, Greg, can you explain the birdwatch thing for people who might not be familiar with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of Twitter's take at fake news. So if you notice something that is a little bit questionable, you could submit. And then if you notice now, even with some of the news articles, if you try to retweet something, but you actually haven't opened the article, you get an alert saying, and I think it's a good one to caution, do you want to maybe read this article first before you retweet it? And so I think some of those things, we're so instant gratification. We're so used to moving so quickly on social media. So even that pause from a psychological standpoint, I hope, and I would love to see data on if it has thwarted some of that spread in terms of percentage of content. But yeah, it's very similar to the efforts. And I think it's always a catch up of who are we going to follow? Twitter, birdwatch, then Facebook with fake news. And so I like to see that competitive accountability too, because you see all of them following. I think TikTok is a little bit in this new space of social media and danger for LGBTQ+, but the birdwatch, yes, definitely look it up. Twitter has some great resources about them. I don't even know if it's been a year, COVID, it might be 3 years ago, 6 months, but it is a recent tool and effort from Twitter.
Thank you. And, and I think it's really, it's fascinating. The fact that you said that it might make people pause, when we talk about bias and interrupting your own bias and your unconscious bias, literally the only way for you to do that is to pause before you react. And so this kind of builds in that pause. I thought it was very interesting that you sort of stated it that way. Jamel, talk to us about the recommendations. What do you think works? What do you think doesn't work? Where are the risks?
So my big thing is transparency. So many of these social media companies have a monopoly, like on certain aspects or certain features, and that creates a system to where our data and our information becomes the currency.
Mhm.
And I think we need to know like where our information is going, who it's being shared with, etc. I also want to bring up some of the more clandestine sides of social media. So the idea or concept of shadow banning. So maybe you don't want to like publicly, like kind of officially slap somebody's hands, but I can think of one of many people who have been. So shadow banning is when a platform stops sharing the things that you want to share. They stop putting your posts out there. So effectively, you connect with no one. But I would like to create some kind of transparency around, things of that nature, because there's a lot of stuff that's happening behind the scenes that you either know about but don't have the details, or you're just completely ignorant to.
Yeah, I think that's a really fascinating one. And again, I don't think everybody knows about those things. So one of the things that came up in Friction was the banning of certain hashtags. That became sort of relevant with the Instagram conversation too, and the anti-vaxxing. And so that, again, it's not necessarily something that people find out about right away, but it can affect the way that you're actually seeing that content. I really would like to just, before we take on the last piece of this, which is the individual actions that we can do, I would like to hear from both of you, maybe Greg and then Jamel, about, can we talk a little bit about how you respond when people say, well, this is viewpoint discrimination? I mean, I certainly have my opinion on not every viewpoint is valid. And some viewpoints are absolutely detrimental and literally harmful. And we have seen how some viewpoints literally can, in fact, lead to direct violence, January 6th. So what I would like to ask you is, how do you respond when somebody brings that up? Because I think that's a tough one. And I think even for me, sometimes I find myself chasing my own First Amendment feelings. So Greg, how do you talk about it?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a line around discrimination and blatant hate speech. But I think a lot of the situations in which we find ourselves are those gray areas, right? Like how do we meet in the middle? One of my favorite quotes is normalizing changing our opinion when presented with new information. And so how do we do that, though, in a social media setting where things are moving so fast? I have started having great conversations, and the moment I make progress, someone else on this public space jumps in and derails the whole thing. And so I think it's, social media can be, it might allude to a symptom of the problem. I think I never had official education on social media growing up. And so I grew up on the teeter-totter. So I grew up without social media, phased into it. And so I worry about folks where you're so young and there's pressure to be on social media with that ubiquitousness. And if we're not looking at these platforms, integrating the literacy and the education around it, but also how do we be civil to each other and have those conversations where I am super stubborn and can be on social media. And so how do we have those conversations? What does it look like to escalate them in a positive and productive way, so it isn't so harmful, it doesn't burn both parties out? And when do we teach ourselves to step away? Because especially on our personal use, when you're overseeing a brand, I feel for everyday social media managers like me, when you're tied to a brand and you are privy and overseeing and being a part of that moderation. But from a personal standpoint, I think we need to have more of those conversations. If you have the mental health and capacity to do so. And that's where we really need our allies to show up and do that labor for us as well. Hey, I have to tap out because I am a part of this community. I will have these conversations for other communities. I will be there when I can, but we really need those allies to help do the work and be a part of that and not run, because it's hard and it gets really, really exhausting.
It does. It does. Jamel, how do you navigate the conversations when it comes down to you're just discriminating against my opinion or my viewpoint?
So being the eminent sassy pants that I am, I'm coming at this from a little different angle than Greg. I feel that, yes, folks are entitled to an opinion, but you are not entitled to having that opinion questioned. And I frequently feel that, particularly in social media spaces, people expect to express an opinion and not have that opinion rebutted. And that's where some of the chaos ensues. But the other thing is like, this is a social media platform. Like you sign an agreement and you sign up for a certain type of operation. And so until there is, once again, like to go back to the water example, like these companies are the people that they're judge, jury, and executioner. And so until we create something else that helps us regulate these things,
yeah,
you kind of really just kind of have to go with the flow, which is the unfortunate part of it. I'm going to go back to something that my mom always told me. Just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should do something. And I feel like that's really what we have to hold on to until something a little more formal comes along.
I have to tell you, I more and more, I write my comment and then I erase it and I don't actually post it. And just the exercise of starting to do it has helped me. I'm doing it more and more these days. It kind of feels good and kind of weird too. So I want to know the last thing that we want to talk about. And Greg and Jamel, you both kind of mentioned it at different points, which is the self-care piece. So on the individual level, what do you suggest to people? I think, we've already talked about this. Some of us are a little bit thicker skinned in the social media universe than others. Some people handle it better than others. It's not a good or bad thing. It's just what you're built for. So Greg, could you talk a little bit about, on an individual level, how you coach people to create change in their social media spaces?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important to, within the nuances of individuals, and as we look at those who are intersectionally a part of so many different communities, like you have to do that self-check-in. Like, how hard have you gone at moderating these conversations? Are you one of those passionate people? And just like that forced check-in, retweeting something you haven't read yet, you almost have to do that with yourself. Okay, I've been at this for hours. I've made no progress. When is it okay to step back? And I think that is okay for you to do personally and have that conversation with yourself. And it's differing for every person. One of my first social media campaigns was riddled with hate speech. And so I got that experience very early on, and it was in a job. And so I had to muster through it. And so you build these systems. Okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to have these responses on this issue that I can copy and paste. So it takes what you just said, Jean Marie, like, oh, I rewrite my comment 12 times. That is emotional labor too. That's exhausting. It can be burnt out. So if you're going to do this, have your allies, make sure you have a community of people that will show up with you or for you or before or after you. And you have to, again, walk away from the screen, especially in this COVID where we're doing virtual happy hours. We're working in front of a screen and anything else. We're watching TV. Like, go outside, get that fresh air, even for 5 minutes if you can, and do that mental reset. And I think that's a lot of it on us. Just like if we have toxic encounters in person, you have to figure out those boundaries. You have to figure out that boundary from that machine that is always in your pocket or in front on your desk. And so I would say, if you could put that on a Post-it note, remember to walk away sometimes, take care of yourself, breathe, stretch, drink water, all of those things. And then if you're there, like I have those conversations and just be there for others. And hopefully we lift up others, support others, and anything in between.
I appreciate hearing that from somebody who is a social media practitioner, that you should walk away. It actually feels really good right now. Jamel, what are you telling people to do to take care of themselves?
I think social media has bred this culture of reacting to everything. And I want to invite everyone to the idea that you do not have to participate in every fight that someone invites you to. I mean, even think about like GIFs and like the way that we respond to our like text, like you have a reaction GIF with the face or the energy that you want to embody like in that moment. And that it's the same way like on social media. So just sometimes you just fall back, just let it ride. Especially us like in this kind of D&I like nonprofit space, like we teach people, this is what we do for a living. And so you have that energy about you to where you want to help folks. And sometimes you just have to not.
Yeah. And I think that is really good advice. It is sort of knowing your boundaries and what you're able to do. Well, we are at time once again. This always goes so fast. Someday, Jamel, we really are doing the after hours. I'm not joking. We got away with it. We have to.
Yeah.
So everybody watch for our PFLAG after hours, something to talk about. Greg, you'll be invited too, potentially to moderate my mouth. Thank you both for being here. You are both awesome. Thank you. This actually made me feel better about social media. This is a little therapeutic. So thank you, Jamel. Thank you, Greg. And welcome, Greg. We'll see you again soon. So everybody, that is the end of our conversation for this week. We will, of course, be back next week, same bat time, same bat channel, to have another really fascinating and important conversation, talking about those important things in our lives. Thank you for joining us again this week. If you need help or support, please visit us at pflag.org. My name is Jean Marie Navetta. Please remember the 3 things that we tell everybody every week, which is to run fast, to laugh hard, and most of all, be kind. And please, if you haven't been yet, get yourself vaccinated and wear masks when appropriate. We'll see everybody next week. Bye.